Okay, we are now recording this meeting. And for those of you who are here, we are recording the meeting. The intent is so that we can post the recording on the website. And the slides that are presented today will also be posted on the website. So, so you don't have to take furious notes unless you'd like to.
Okay, so Malcolm, do you want to give everybody just another minute or so and see if we get, what are we up to, 38?
So what do you think? What do you think, Matt?
I would say it's only 4:02, and given the nature of the virtual business here, we should probably give them a couple of minutes before we get going. And that way we don't have to repeat ourselves.
Sure.
Sounds good.
If I were a betting man, I'd say it's going to be closer to 50 than it is 40, but we'll see how we do.
Okay.
Amanda, welcome, Amanda from DWR.
And for those of you who are just coming on, you are muted. If you are experiencing any difficulties, you can type that into the chat or just text me at 415-225-5726.
We've hit 40 now. I'll take this opportunity to do my my duty here. I've noted I have both of my council aboard as well, so I want to make note of the fact for the public that there are at least 3 of the 5 board members aboard. That was serendipity. They were all invited, but this is not a board meeting, nor even is it a sponsored board workshop. So we will treat this as no different than a fancy cocktail party for our board members, and they are not going to be doing any deliberations or making any decisions today. So that is my my Brown Act disclaimer, even under the virtual world. So hopefully that will satisfy council before we get going, and we'll move forward. I get a thumbs up. I like that. Always, it's good to have council happy. So, but anyway, you wanna get going here, Amir, and we're at 4:05, so that's kind of my magic number. We'll probably gain some people as we get going. A few folks did indicate to me today that they would be joining perhaps a few minutes off of the actual start time, but they were going to try to join in. So is that okay, Malka?
That sounds good. Do you want to open the meeting?
All right, I'll quit my chit chat and welcome everybody to the meeting. I am Matt Hurley. I am the General Manager of the McMullin Area Groundwater Sustainability Agency. This is an agency interested workshop, but we have the tremendous talents of the Geosyntec team, who are our appointed team to lead us in discussions and education and outreach and a process that will hopefully allow MAGSA to learn about and possibly come to a conclusion to adopt water marketing, at least of our groundwater, and possibly of additional surface water supplies in the future as part of our implementation under SGMA. And so they are way more talented than I am, and so I will hand it back to Malka for all of the appropriate formalities, and then I'm sure she'll be handing it off to Amir Hussein, who's the GeoSyntech lead. So welcome everybody. I'm going to go on mute and watch just like you are. So let's sit back and learn.
Thank you, Matt. I'm Malka Coppell from Cal State Sacramento, and I will be your facilitator this afternoon and evening. Welcome, and thank you for being patient with the Zoom platform. It allows us to do some wonderful things, but sometimes it's something that we all need to learn about. I've learned a lot about Zoom the last few months. So I'm really glad to see a good turnout today. And we'll, in our presentation today, we'll talk about additional ways that people can stay informed and keep involved. Reminding people that we are recording the meeting, and the intention is that this meeting will be, the recording will be put on the website, and the slides that are in this, that will be in the presentation will also be on the website. Again, you're all on mute. We will have plenty of time for Q&A and comments. And when we get to that point, we'll ask people to raise their hand and I'll call on you, or you can type a question into the chat. And if you need to speak, then you will be unmuted. I'm not seeing any chats, so I am going to start by sharing my screen. Team members, is that showing up?
It is, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to start by going over the agenda for this meeting. This is a workshop and an opportunity to learn about the water market study that this team is contracted to carry out over the next few months. We want to introduce some concepts to you all, including some components of groundwater markets. We'll talk about some existing markets and the results of our initial analysis. And then we're going to provide at least an hour, I think, for questions and feedback from you all. This is not the only time that you will get a chance to learn, but it is the first time. So we hope that we can provide enough information that will give you some idea of what we're looking forward to for the next few months. This meeting is scheduled to end by 6. If it turns out that we end early, we'll end early, but we will definitely, if people want to continue participating, we'll go through 6 o'clock. Okay. Amir, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Malka. So welcome everyone. I know this is right in the middle of harvest, so we appreciate those of you making the time to be here tonight. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am Amir Hussein. I am the project manager and the lead contact for the GeoSyntech team. My role is to kind of direct our efforts and like I said, be that main point of contact. I want to take just a few minutes and quickly introduce the other team members and then jump right into the heart of our presentation. So with me this afternoon is Bob Anderson, also with GeoSyntech, and Bob is one of our principal hydrogeologists. He's going to present an overview of the market study and the relationship between the study and the GSP and how those fit together. And again, like I said, while we're the lead, we've got several just great team members who are also going to be presenting with us this afternoon. You got a chance to meet Malka already, and she and Dave Seppos are with the Sacramento State Census and Collaboration Program. They're responsible for our outreach efforts as well as facilitating some of the conversations that we're going to have with you all and some of the stakeholders. The other team, some of the key team members are Duncan McEwen and Steve Hatchett with ERA Economics. I think Steve and Duncan are going to be some of the key items that we're going to focus in on today's presentation. They're actually going to talk a little bit about what actually makes up all the different components that make up a water market, and then present some examples of existing markets and how they operate. And then finally with us is Gwen Moore and Tully and Greg Young with Tully and Young, who kind of specialize in water resources, water supply, and water rights. And they're a really key part of our team moving forward. And you're going to hear a lot more from the two of them in some of our future workshops. As Malka said, this isn't going to be the only time we're going to be presenting to the stakeholders and to this group. So we want to keep you all engaged and move forward with us as we continue with the study. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to talk more about an overview of the study itself.
All right. Thank you, Amir. So I'm going to give just a little bit of an introduction on what this study is all about, how it relates to our GSP, and some very basic information, introduction to water markets. So next slide, please, Malka. So this study is funded in part by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation under what they call their Water Smart program. This program funds a variety of water management studies, infrastructure projects, and they have a special classification focused on water marketing. What we're doing is a fairly general study where we're going to be describing components of a market, looking at a range of alternatives and requirements and options that MAGSA might have to develop one, evaluating some of the constraints and opportunities of integrating surface water into everything, and importantly, especially in terms of what we're doing today, listening to stakeholders on preferences and concerns. So you can see it's broad, and you can also see that what we're not doing is getting into any formalization of any sort of a groundwater allocation. We're not going to be initiating any sort of a pilot or any sort of water market testing. We're not going to be conducting any transactions. We expect to work on this through the end of the year with a couple more workshops, and we're targeting a completion here in the spring of 21. Next slide, please. So I'm assuming everybody here has some familiarity with MAGSA. McMullin Area GSA is one of several GSAs in the Kings River Basin. And you're one of several GFAs managing the basin. You've got a plan. It's a good one, I might add. And I think it covers everything that's required within SGMA. We don't really know what DWR will think about the plan yet, but Matt and MAGSA board and your GSP consultant, Provost and Pritchard, are moving ahead on a variety of fronts to start implementing the plan. So in some respects, your SGMA journey is only just starting, but groundwater marketing has been identified as potentially being part of that journey. So next slide, Malka. So what are we managing? You know, in real simplistic terms, we're trying to manage declining water levels. In overdrafted basins, this is one of the key undesirable effects of SGMA. We know water levels are declining and have been declining for quite some time. Here are a couple of plots of some wells in the McMullin area that show, water level declines of over 80 to over 100 feet, 200 feet in some areas. And so what we're trying to do is identify this implementation period. That's where the green lines and the green triangles are, where we're going to try to arrest this decline and reach some sort of stabilized water level throughout the basin. So achieving these water levels in many respects is going to define success in the eyes of DWR. So the question is, what's going to change this trajectory and stabilize water levels? Well, your plan has outlined a number of projects and management actions, which are really kind of your roadmap for the future on things that MAGSA and other GSAs are going to be working on to try and achieve this sustainable condition. Next slide, please. So your roadmap has projects and management actions. And again, if we kind of really simplify this, and I love this water drop slide, you've got two knobs. We can enhance the supply or we can reduce the demand. And I'll give a shout out to KRCD, who are MAGSA's outreach consultant on this. they developed this this graphic. They put it in coasters and other sorts of things. And when I was talking to Crystal and Rebecca about using it, they said, well, you know, if we were in person, we'd have one for everybody that came to the meeting. So if we ever get a chance to meet face to face, we'll make sure and bring some coasters. But supply enhancement can be a lot of things, and these projects are well described in your plan. Bring in more surface water, have better conveyance, improve recharge. And on the other side of the knobs, the other knob is this demand reduction. And these are less like engineering projects and more aligned with what you'd call a management action. And your GSP identifies a number of them: education, wellhead requirements, which really is about how you're going to measure groundwater withdrawals, fees and incentives, and then of course pumping restrictions, which is of considerable interest to everyone here in this room and throughout the state of California, really. Now, water marketing is called out in your plan, but it's not a requirement, but it relates to these other things, and sometimes very directly. So allocation and pumping is really a requirement in order for a market to function, and Duncan's going to talk a little bit more about that later. Some of these other elements are really just influences where, you know, if you're going to have a market, that will probably affect how you do your education and outreach, and perhaps how you measure things and that sort of thing. So demand reduction is a difficult subject. Nobody likes to lose something, and there are lots of factors to consider, and it doesn't happen overnight. So remember, this is why Sigma gives you 20 years to work it out, and your GSP discusses this idea of ramp down, where you're going to gradually decrease your demand from where you are today to some point 2040 that's going to reflect this new balance between your water supply and water demand. So I'm going to go over a couple of very basic concepts involved in markets here, and then we'll transition to Duncan. Next slide, please. All right, so a groundwater market requires some sort of tradable unit of water. When you go through the process of allocation, in one sense, you're going to have a big number that relates to overall sustainability, but it's not going to intrinsically define the units of water that could be traded in a market, or really how an individual landowner could participate in trade. So for the purposes of our discussion today, we're going to use the term tradable units. And very simply, you know, a tradable unit is equal to some quantity of water. So it's a bucket of water. It's not a acre foot per acre. It's an acre foot of water. It's a volume, tangible volume. The second thing is that this total water volume of tradable units cannot exceed the total allocation. So it's really kind of a subset of your allocation, and it's going to address, your allocation is going to address some things, including the sustainable yield, this transition from where you are now to 2040, and then any credits that you might want to include in your trading system. And then finally, the formula that determines how much water is associated with any individual unit can be based on a lot of different factors. So the market's tied to the allocation and sustainable yield, but it doesn't replace it. And really what the market's going to do is create more flexibility to individual landowners to respond and adapt to the allocation that comes out of your implementation of your GSP. Next slide, please. So tradable units can be based on a variety of factors that accommodate lots of different things. It could accommodate land types, productive status of those lands. That's the blue box in the upper left-hand corner. It can treat hydrogeologic zones differently, such as an upper and lower aquifer, or proximity to streams. That's the green box. It can look at historical beneficial use and honor specific water right principles. And it can also acknowledge the source of recharge entering a well. So in the case of recharge, tradable groundwater can actually be creating credits through recharge of imported water. So it's actually a way to integrate this other knob, this new supply knob, into your market. And there could be other factors here. You know, you have kind of a clean slate. If everyone agreed that names starting with last names with starting with M should somehow be incorporated and be granted some different status in your market, you can build that into the rules of your market. The only, hard and fast rule is that the math needs to work out so that the total water volume that's being traded doesn't exceed the allocation at any one time. So again, to recap, tradable units are not the allocation, but they're related. And they could even address certain factors that weren't addressed in the allocation. So if your allocation doesn't factor in hydrogeologic zones, you could set up rules and structures in the market to try and address some of those things. But again, to get to the point of deriving tradable units that are linked to the allocation, if you get to that point, you will have made a really huge step towards developing a groundwater market. So before I hand it off to Duncan, I also want to just make a couple of points about our team, because we have the background to address all of these factors, and we have experience in how they affect markets here in California and in other areas. Amir and I are working in GSAs across California on GSP development, and we're following this topic closely. And in fact, I have kind of an unusual certification where I'm called a Certified Water Right Examiner in the state of Washington. And that certification was really developed to enable a little bit more efficient transactional certification that would lead to water markets. So I'm able to conduct certain analyses and certify certain parts of water transfers, and that's part of how a market needs to work. You don't want to wait for a year in order to have some sort of certification of your trade. And then, of course, as Amir pointed out, Tully and Young are familiar with marketing activities here in California, including right next door in Madera County. Winmore Tully brings some specific legal experience that's going to help us work through some of these issues. And then when it comes to ERA, they're familiar not only with the structure of trading markets and that sort of thing, but they're also really familiar with the economics of agricultural commodities in California. And that's going to be an important underlying driver for how any groundwater market is going to perform here. So again, we're excited to be working with you, and we're really looking forward to hearing your feedback on that. And so with that as an introduction, I'm going to hand it off to Duncan McEwen, who is a principal economist and co-founder of ERA Economics. So over to you, Duncan.
Thank you very much, Bob. Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully y'all can hear me just fine. So first of all, I just want to say thanks again for the opportunity to work with everybody. We're looking forward to introducing some concepts today, and then working with folks to get feedback and working on future workshops with everybody. So what I'm going to talk about is a couple of things. I want to provide a general overview of the groundwater market and talk specifically about what the components of a groundwater market are and how we're thinking about them and how they fit into this project, and what types of feedback and discussion we're going to be looking for from the stakeholders in these public meetings. So with that, just to kind of quickly recap what I think is one of the key points in Bob's introduction, there's a GSP, and in the GSP, there's a demand reduction program that's specified. And one of the requirements for a demand reduction program to work would be to look at the concept of an allocation. And you can have an allocation with or without a groundwater market, and the focus of this study is to look at what that would be if you had a groundwater market established as well. Next slide, please, Malka. So maybe a good place to start is with a pretty simple question that has kind of a complex answer. So what is a groundwater market? So fundamentally, we're thinking of a groundwater market as an institution, or you can think of it as a framework that allows willing participants to get together and buy and sell groundwater within a defined set of rules within MAGSA. So I think the important thing, and we're going to circle back to this a couple times in the presentation, but kind of the important point here is that a market is more than just an allocation, and it's more than just kind of a framework for trading. So it's not just an online exchange of information on a bulletin board or some other electronic framework, and it's more than just determining how much water is actually available to pump. So next question is, well, what does a well-functioning, so skip way ahead, what's a well-functioning groundwater market actually look like? And we think it provides kind of two key things that we wanted to point out. So first, it provides information on the value of water. So this is important, and particularly important as GSPs are being implemented across the state, because it provides information that can help evaluate financial decisions. So for example, looking at the decision of whether to invest in additional land in the GSA or in another GSA. Understanding what water is worth helps value that additional land asset. You know, or more directly, if you're looking at, you know, a third, fourth, fifth leaf almond orchard and trying to evaluate what that investment looks like, what that asset looks like over the rest of its remaining life. Having an idea of what the value of water is and its availability is important for looking at those types of financial decisions. The second thing is that markets allow water to move to higher value uses. And this is pretty commonly described when people are talking about groundwater markets. And so what do we mean by that? So it's the typical thing, so it can move obviously to higher profit activities for farming operations on ranches. But value also encompasses more than just profitability for crops. We're also thinking about other potential sustainability indicators for a GSA, if there's other market rules or considerations that want to be implemented. So there's ways to think about value more broadly than just profitability of a specific crop. So again, as I mentioned, the GSP has a demand management program specified within it. And one way to think about a market is adding flexibility for the allocation that would be associated with any type of demand management program. So just by way of example, Malka, if you were to just click once, so we could think of, let's call it a firm allocation, which in the discussions that we're involved with, you know, is kind of the way most people think about this question. How much water is available? How much water is available per acre? So a firm allocation that doesn't allow that water to move or be reallocated across land would be pretty difficult to manage. I mean, in almost any situation, you wouldn't have sufficient water to irrigate any given parcel or any given acre. So one way to add some flexibility, if you click again, Malka, would be to think about a more flexible allocation. And this can be done without a groundwater market. And we're actually going to return to this point a little bit later as well. But the concept would be allowing water to be reallocated across parcels within, say, a defined ownership structure or some other contiguous or non-contiguous land patterns that are decided by the GSA. So basically you can have the flexibility to move water to its higher and better uses on the range. So you know you've got some of the younger blocks with better varieties that have been planted, and you would move water to those assets because it's higher value use. And then if you click again, Malka, the market basically is just another layer on top of this. So it adds an additional level of flexibility. So the ability to move potentially allocations within, say, a ranch or an operation, and then the ability to purchase or sell water from partners within the GSA. So the example shows, in this case, water being purchased, water coming in, and money flowing out. So that's kind of the concepts that we're thinking about when we're thinking about overall picture for groundwater market. If you click to the next slide, Malka. So what does an effective groundwater market require? Probably four key things. Maybe a fifth one that's implicit is that there's a need for a market, that there's not enough of the resource, in this case, groundwater. But probably one of the most important factors is that participants know what they can trade. So this gets back to the concept of allocation and then the tradable units that are some subset of that allocation potentially. You need to know what's available and how it's managed, and be sure that everybody's operating on an even playing field. Second thing is market information is available to participants and managers. So market information includes a bunch of different factors. So for example, price, what's the mechanism for understanding what the going price of water is in the market? Is that public information? Is it only available to market participants? These types of questions. How do you find out? How do you find partners? How do you find who's actually participating in the market? Third item would be that participation and management costs are reasonable and not prohibitive. There's going to be costs to set up a market. There's costs to manage a market. We're going to talk a little bit today about rules and how a market can be structured. But these include costs both for the stakeholder, so things like searching out partners and actually negotiating deals. And depending on how a market's structured, those costs can look very different, as well as costs that would be borne by either the GSA or a third-party entity that's in charge of actually administering and managing the groundwater market. So those need to be reasonable so that folks can actually participate, and there would be actual trading occurring in the market. And then the fourth bullet that we have listed here is probably the most important component, we think. So market components are understood and agreed to by all parties. Later, Steve Hatchett, also from ERA, is going to talk through some examples of groundwater markets that exist across the Western US. And kind of the key point there is that all of them are designed with local considerations in mind, and there's not really a plug and play answer for anywhere. The way an effective market comes together is it's developed by the stakeholders with stakeholder input and tailored to local considerations. So everything that we're talking about is to present options and examples, and then solicit feedback to see what's of interest for stakeholders in MAGSA. Next slide, please, Malcolm. The other thing to point out is I think it's important to know what a groundwater market is not. So I think there's 5 key things that a groundwater market does not do. So first, a groundwater market wouldn't require any individual or water user to buy or sell water. We're not aware of a market that's been set up where you're required to buy in if you're already part of the landowner or water users in the area. Second, the market doesn't by itself affect the GSP water budget or the sustainable yield. As Bob explained in his opening remarks, that's part of the GSP process. Those parameters have been set and the market operates within those considerations. It doesn't preclude developing new sources of supply. In fact, it works pretty well with importing or with developing new sources of supply, at least from evaluating those potential investments. Having a market and understanding the local value of water gives you some sense of what you'd be willing to pay, or what types of project costs would be reasonable given the going rate of water in the local area. A market doesn't require a permanent reallocation of groundwater. Everything that we're talking about in the examples that we're going through would be for temporary trades. So it's not a permanent transfer of groundwater in any sense. And then finally, as we pointed out a few times, the market doesn't determine an allocation. It is required for a market to work, and in particular, tradable units need to be well-defined and understood by market participants. With that, next slide, please, Malka. So last thing I wanted to do is talk just kind of in a general sense, what are the components that make up a groundwater market? So as we mentioned, it's more than just an allocation or an online framework that allows you to buy and sell water. So if you click the next slide, Malka. So these 7 boxes that we've laid out here kind of encompass what we think are the key components for groundwater market development. So there's a lot of things here, and I'll kind of step through them individually. But first thing to point out is that allocation is one box, and then that's also related to basin conditions. These are 2 things that are largely defined under the GSP process. So they're kind of highlighted in a gray color in the chart here. It's kind of outside of the decision process for the groundwater market project that we're working on. So basin conditions are basically what's the reason for even considering a market. And obviously in MAGSA, it's sigma, and then the requirements spelled out in the GSP. Second component is allocation, which is effectively quantifying the total amount of water available, the sustainable yield, and then deciding how that's assigned to different interests in the subbasin. What we'll focus on and talk about for the groundwater market would be the tradable units. So what portion of the allocation is actually tradable? And Greg Young is going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So trading structure, I think, is another thing that sometimes gets referred to as the groundwater market. So the trading structure is kind of the marketplace where buyers and sellers can get together to actually make transactions. So that can be online and electronic, something that looks like a stock market, or kind of more informal arrangements similar to how surface water transfers are currently done across the state. And so we'll talk about this in detail today as well. Market rules, this encompasses a whole bunch of factors. So things like who can participate in the market, questions about ability to carry over groundwater credits or pumping quantities. You know, does that happen for 1 year or 2 years? Is there a max? And then important considerations about preventing or mitigating any undesired outcomes of the market. So this would be making sure that the market functions within the GSP and continues to achieve sustainability objectives. If there's concerns about too much pumping in certain areas affecting infrastructure, subsidence, or if there's disadvantaged communities, all of these factors can be dealt with through market rules. And we have some really good examples about how those have been dealt with in other groundwater basins across the Western US. Monitoring and enforcement obviously is important. You need to know what's available and how it's being tracked and be sure that everybody's on the same playing field. There's kind of 3 general approaches that are looked at right now for monitoring, metering, obviously, remote sensing approaches or other kind of crop-based coefficient approaches. Market administration, there's a decision that, is the market administered by a third party or is it administered by the GSA? And then finally, market reporting. How are transactions recorded? How are prices recorded? Is that information confidential? What pieces of that information is made available and to which parties? I think the important thing to point out on all these components is that they're related and we can't really just look at them kind of isolated in a box. So for example, designing complicated market rules, there's definitely examples of groundwater markets that have done that, and those can be done. But that relates to the trading structure. So if you have rules, there needs to be somebody that's able to review those trades to ensure that they're adhering to the rules that have been defined, and that can increase costs if it's falling on a GSA. So there's other trading structures that use computer algorithms to reduce some of those review costs and examples like that. Basically, all of these components relate to each other, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So obviously, these 7 items are a lot to cover. This is what we're going to be working on over the next year into the spring of 2021. The thing that we wanted to focus on today, if you click again, Malka, are the 2 components highlighted here. Malka, if you hit next. Back one more time. Yeah, so we're just going to focus today on the allocation and in particular talk a little bit about tradable units and then the trading structure, so this marketplace. So Greg Young is going to talk about the allocations, and then Steve Hatchett's going to talk a bit about trading structure, and then Steve's going to wrap up with a discussion of example markets that we've looked at across the Western US and how these pieces fit into those markets and were considered in their development. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to Greg Young. If you can hit next, thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Hi, my name is Greg Young, one of the principals at Tully & Young. Appreciate the opportunity to present to this group at this workshop. We're going to talk a little bit about tradable units / allocations and the relationships thereof. So next slide, please, Malka. Want to start off, as we've kind of been talking about several times here, the management and decision processes about allocations are not in the purview of this study, but they are important to this study and this water market effort. And so we are interested in understanding them. We are interested in getting feedback on thoughts as it relates to allocations. The graph on the side here kind of shows the anticipated operations over time in the MAGSA subbasin, where that is, there's a certain defined sustainable kind of native groundwater quantity. And then there's an amount of transitional water that'll get smaller and smaller. And the reason for that transitional water is to provide some additional flexibility to manage the demand reduction that is identified in the GSP. So when we look at that, the question about what groundwater sources could actually be tradable is still an open question. An allocation probably will need to be made for a sustainable yield, a different allocation possibly for transition water, and maybe even allocations associated with imported or banked water that is brought in as new water sources into the MAGSA area. So for each of those sources, when you start thinking about allocation questions, and we're trying to plant some seeds to get some conversations going within MAGSA on these topics. We're not looking to answer these ourselves. Questions for each of these questions for each of these may be, how might the allocation be quantified within MAGSA? For instance, the sustainable yield is defined by the King subbasin and essentially handed to MAGSA, and MAGSA is told, here's the amount of groundwater you have available on a sustainable basis, and maybe an average annual number. And secondly, MAGSA itself may define how much transition water it has available on a year-by-year basis, as that relates to monitoring for a variety of the sustainability indicators, like watching groundwater levels, watching subsidence or water quality indicators, and that might define how much additional water may be available as you transition to a lower future total consumptive use of groundwater. The next question that you might ask for each of these sources of groundwater is, how are they shared or distributed amongst the users in MAGSA? Next slide, please, Malka. So one of the ways to think about allocations, again, per each of those different sources, should they be defined per acre, per farming operation, based on historical use, or equal for everybody? Some hybrid, some other factors, as Bob had mentioned earlier. If your last name starts with M, maybe you get a bonus. Maybe there's a process that has an opt-in or opt-out approach that lets some people participate and others that choose not to based on an opportunity. And then one of the other questions to start thinking about is, does MAGSA determine these allocations differently? It is very possible that the allocation for sustainable yield is available in one manner, and the water supply for transitional water, the allocation for transitional water is different. For instance, let's say MAGSA determines sustainable yield is equally shared, so the same portion of water is available to every acre in the entire MAGSA area. But the transition water maybe is available on a different manner associated with crop type or location, or any number of other factors. So these are the things we want you to be thinking about. Is for some reason my video decided to stop on me. Sorry, I'm back. So we just want to be able to have you guys start thinking about these things and have that conversation bubble up within MAGSA and inform our efforts on the water market. The biggest question then becomes, for each of those allocations associated with each of those sources, are they fully or partially tradable? It is possible that you may say sustainable yield, that native groundwater, is tradable, but transition water is not tradable. Or maybe the other way around, or maybe both are tradable. And they both may have different rules, as was just discussed with Duncan. They may have different limits based on the geography, the location, the groundwater conditions, whether they're near disadvantaged communities or not, and a variety of other factors to consider. So next slide, Malka. Malka, next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm having a bit of technical difficulties. Let me get to it.
No problem. I wasn't sure if it was on my end.
Huh. Seems to be frozen. Hold on.
All right, I'll continue talking.
Okay.
So one of the things to consider for tradability of allocations is, again, that each of those factors could be treated differently. And so for each, we should consider whether the rules are the same. And that, I think the key thing to take away from that is with those market components that Duncan just talked about, they can be the same market components regardless of whether or not MAGSA allocates the groundwater sources differently and or defines tradable units differently amongst those. So for instance, if you're going to have a certain market structure available through a bulletin board system or something, that would be the same system used for both sources of water if sustainable yield is tradable and transitional water were to be tradable. Even though the rules may vary, some of the base components would be the same for both of those. So what we wanted to really try and make sure people understood is the relationship between the market. It will have some sort of defined tradable unit, which is associated with an allocation, but that allocation and therefore the tradable unit might vary depending on what type of water we're talking about. And these components that we're going to structure then should be able to accommodate the direction that MAGSA chooses to go with several of those allocation questions, and should be able to be adaptable to a change over time if things are going in a direction that MAGSA decides it wants to adjust. The market should be in a place to be able to take those adjustments. So we'll be considering all those things while developing recommendations on a market structure. That really was all I was going to touch base on for this presentation and this workshop. So I'm going to turn it back over to Malka.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to Steve, I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A and comments. So Steve, I'm going to ask you to keep that in mind when you present.
All right, thank you, Greg. So I'm Steve Hatchett with ERA Economics. I have sort of two sections of my presentation. The first is to give you some more description and examples of what we mean by market structure, sort of in the abstract. And then after that, I'm going to go through a few examples, and I'll let Malka decide, you know, how many examples we want to go through. I have 6, but we might want to squeeze that down a little bit and just for the last couple, just hit on the highlights. Next slide, please. All right, so trading structure, and Duncan mentioned some of this information. So it's basically the marketplace for where the willing buyers and sellers come together to initiate and complete deals, trading deals. It's you used to think about that as like a trading floor or a storefront, and now much of that will go on in either between individuals or in some kind of electronic online way. The trading structure itself is affected by and affects a number of these other aspects related to overall market design. So the trading structure will affect how much time and effort individual traders might spend in finding partners. Going the other direction, confidentiality concerns or desires could influence how you think about a preferred trading structure. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So to illustrate with some examples to give you a better sense of what we really mean by trading structure, the simplest to me is just sort of bilateral deals, one-to-one deals in which a buyer and a seller find each other and negotiate terms and strike a deal, and then they report the results of their trade up to the trading manager and or the GSA, depending on how responsibility is shared at that level, for review and approval. And this kind of transaction has gone on certainly in California water for decades and decades, very common. The next step up from that in terms of easing the burden of buyers and sellers finding each other is to have an online bulletin board. Again, the phrase bulletin board indicates those used to be literal bulletin boards, but those are like Craigslist these days. And they can substantially reduce the time needed to find a willing partner for a trade. Once you find that person or that entity, it's still a bilateral negotiation, and the onus of reporting the result is still on the traders themselves. So we're all familiar with used equipment transactions, buying or selling used vehicles on a Craigslist or something like that. The third category is fairly broad, what we call brokers here. And these are sort of third parties who either can simply facilitate a deal, much like a real estate agent and a real estate broker would. They have access to information on potential willing sellers and willing buyers, and they bring those two together, and they may help with the negotiation. They may have information to pre-screen what kind of deal may or may not meet with approval of the review agency, etc. Now there's another sort of category related to this, which in some parts of the Western US are called water banks. We're not going to use that term so we don't confuse it with the notion of groundwater banks, as they're called in Kern County and other places. But they're essentially brokers who sort of consolidate or acquire access to water either through options or outright, and then wait for willing buyers to come to them. So that would also be an example under this category. And finally, electronic markets. Duncan mentioned an example of those. That's where all of the buyers and sellers really submit information into a centralized computer database and program or algorithm. And then the computer matches up buyers and sellers according to some criteria. And it can, at the same time, during that process, impose or test for whether those trades meet with the guidelines imposed by GSP sustainability criteria. So an electronic market can allow fairly rapid implementation of a large number of trades at once, and this is of course why commodities and stock markets are set up that way. But they can also avoid some and maybe most of a separate review process, in the sense that they can incorporate those kind of review criteria within the way that they make the deals. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so as you're thinking about those different kinds of trading structures, and in my next few slides on examples, let's kind of tee up some questions for you to have in your mind. And these are questions that you can come back to help you frame specific questions to us either today, or think about comments and mulling over what you've heard today over the next weeks and months. But so key differences in these trading structures have to do with, who approves the trades, what kind of information gets transmitted, who's responsible for transmitting the information about the trades, what kind of delays might be involved in review and approval, how are the underlying market rules, especially those that flow out of sustainability criteria and restrictions of the GSP, and then how do traders go about finding each other, and how do they interact, and how is information made available to various parties or not made available. So with that, let's move on to the next section. So these are groundwater market examples. They're just examples. We're not recommending anything here. We're just sort of laying out a range of what exists in the world today in terms of groundwater markets. So next slide. Here are a subset of existing water markets in the Western US. And if I have time, I'll talk about one briefly in Australia. This is not the total of all water markets for sure. There's plenty of other water markets that are going on in California, Idaho, New Mexico, and other places. But these are some examples. And
you wanted to highlight 2 or 3, and we can always come back to the examples if someone wants to see the rest of them.
Yes. So let's move on to the next slide. So I'll talk first about Chino Basin in Southern California. So it's an adjudicated basin that's had decades of dispute. The latest major court decision was in 1998, and there have been so-called peace agreements since then. So you give you an idea of the amount of dispute. It's operated by a water master. Again, the allocation is adjudicated, but an interesting feature of this one is there are 2 stages of allocation. One is to 3 independent pools. There's an agricultural pool, a non-agricultural pool, and an appropriative pool, which is largely municipalities and water districts. And then within those pools, there's further allocation. There's been trading going on. Trading is allowed. There doesn't appear to be a centralized market, so these are all individual trades happening between buyers and sellers within the basin. And one other interesting feature of this one is that the water master effectively acts as the default buyer of water. If a pumper within the basin overuses their allowed pumping over a short period of time, and they have not identified another pumper to trade for their allocation, the water master steps in and actually assesses that user for overuse, uses that money to buy replenishment water, and it's not cheap. Current assessment rate is about $750 an acre-foot. All right, next example. How much time do you want me to take on these? We're almost at 5 o'clock, so I'll zip through just what is I think salient. Fox Canyon is currently in a pilot program. I think many of you may have some idea of what's happening there. They have an allocation based on historical baseline of 2005 through 2014. They allow trading, but they've implemented a centralized market operated by an independent third party. So the GSA looks at the trades coming out of that centralized market and reviews those for compatibility with their GSP requirements. Let's go to the next example.
You want to do Yakima?
Let me say one thing about Twin Platte in Nebraska. It's managed for stream flow depletion, but interestingly, it's not managed to an allocation of water per se or a limit on water. It's managed based on certified irrigated acreage. That works better in Nebraska, I suspect, than it would in the Central Valley of California. But basically, what's traded are certified irrigated acres, not water per se. So let's go on to the next. So Yakima is a very large basin operated by the Bureau of Reclamation. It's got very large irrigation divisions, but for surface water, but a significant amount of groundwater is also traded. Allocation was just finalized last year in an adjudication of the entire basin. This is an example of where a number of different approaches are used and market structures are used, both individual bilateral deals. There are brokers and these so-called banks that I talked about, where brokers accumulate water and then find buyers. And they're also in the process now of developing a smart market, a centralized market that incorporates locational and potentially stream depletion factors. So I'm willing to go on, Malka, if you'd like to let's see, Namoy Basin in Australia is, I'm going to keep going until you tell me time. Let's see, what's interesting about this one is they had an implementation plan where they've had to significantly ramp down total use from the earlier sort of groundwater law to the current safe yield imposition. And they've done that over a 10-year ramp down period. Most of the transactions are done through brokerages. There's some very large brokerages, including some that you may have heard of that are active to an extent in California. So I think I'll end it there and just reiterate that these are just to get you thinking about the different approaches and maybe highlight questions for you in a few minutes or comments that you can submit to us at any time. So I'll turn it over to Amir.
Thank you, Steve. Well, we obviously have covered a lot of ground. We've actually gone a little bit longer than what we'd like, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here quickly. Malcolm, if you can get me the next slide. What we're looking for is a lot of input from all of you and the stakeholders here in MAGSA. As Malcolm said early on, this is not the only time you're going to hear from us. So as you get a chance to look at some of these slides and get this information and start to develop questions, even after this, please reach out to us and we're happy to answer any questions, and there's going to be multiple opportunities for all of you to provide input. But what I'm hoping that we've left with you is the idea that markets can be very flexible in helping you achieve your goals and for sustainability in MAGSA. There was a number of different ways that you can derive some of these trading units. Bob and Greg kind of went over several of them and what should be traded and what portion of that water can be traded or if that unit can be traded. These are the types of questions that we're going to be evaluating and asking you to give us some of your input on what you'd like to see in MAGSA. And of course, this trading structure. Is it a bulletin board one-on-one type trade? Is it a more centralized, computerized trading structure? What would work? And again, all of these are going to be evaluated as part of our study, but we are going to continue to give you input or ask for your input as we provide more information to this group. You know, how do we make it so that the administrative burden is not overwhelming? What should the role of the GSA be in this market? And what's the kind of transparency for the trades that do occur? At what type of confidentiality clauses do we need to build into this? So there's lots of rules that we can build into the market, and that's what we're looking for, is your input and your thoughts on this. So let me turn it over to Malka. I know you want to get to the Q&A and talk a little bit about how to keep everyone engaged in the process.
Yes, as Amir said, this is not the last time that we're going to be talking to you, and hopefully not the last time that you'll be talking to us. So I wanted to give you a list of kind of how you can stay informed. First is continue to watch the website for updates. The web address is up there, although I suspect you know what it is. If you aren't on the interested parties list, please get on it. As I think you know, you can sign up for the general MAGSA interested parties list on the website as well. We've also set up a special email address, which is on the website, but you can also just email watermarket@mcmullinarea.org if you have questions that you'd like to write in or comments, and we can respond to those. And we have two other opportunities planned to do more workshops to kind of for the team to tell you where they are in the process and to get your input. So the next technical workshop will be planned for September or October later this year. And then the final technical workshop for March or April of next year. We're also noodling around some additional opportunities for maybe more informal dialogue, maybe setting aside some time before board meetings. So stay tuned for that. We'll email you through the interested parties list, and or it'll be on the website. So again, we know we've given you a lot of information today. You feel free to peruse the slides at your leisure, listen to the recording, ask questions whenever you'd like, and hopefully we will also be able to get together for more conversation. So, speaking of conversation, I am going to like to give people a chance to ask questions or provide comments, and I'll let you know how that's going to work. So in the participant part of your Zoom screen, which is on the bottom, if you click on that, you'll see the list of participants, and you have an opportunity to raise your hand. You can also, if you'd like, or if you'd like to write a question in the chat, you can do that as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take the questions in order. If you've raised your hand, I will unmute you and ask you to speak. And when you speak, please state your name and affiliation if you'd like. And then when you're done, you can lower your hand and mute yourself. So I see a raised hand. Let me call this up. Actually, let me stop sharing my screen. Okay. Thought I saw raised. If you're participating on the phone only and you can't see the screen, you can also raise your hand by pressing *9. I thought I saw. I don't see it anymore. Jeevan, did you raise your hand? Let me.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name's Jeevan. I'm on the board of MAGSA. The one comment I do have is that the upcoming meeting that's in September and October, I would prefer it to be October. And I think a lot of my farming coworkers might agree to that. And second is, as far as what kind of the administrative issue, I think I would like at least Matt Hurley to have access to it and be the validator of the trades. And maybe if possible, if it's not too much, maybe the board can be in on it, or otherwise Matt can always forward us the details and we discuss that. At least that's my point of view. Other than that, I don't have much questions right now.
Thank you. Amir, any comment or?
So Jeevan, can I ask you to maybe elaborate just slightly on that? When you say, it sounds to me like you would like the GSA to be involved in the market structure, in the trading structure. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. I would like the GSA to be involved, and I would like it to have a final say on the trades, especially that are with either going. I don't know if we're going to build it outside of the GSA also, or it's only going to be limited to GSA. In either case, I want the board to have a final say on it, because if people are sending out water and we are not getting back, I wouldn't like that at all, nor would anybody else, I think.
Okay, so I think one of the things I do want to remind everyone in kind of response to Jeevan's question is that there are going to be rules set up. Duncan talked about this, that you, the stakeholders and the board, are going to be able to set those rules. And those rules are going to be important, and they're going to essentially dictate how the market operates. And so if you, for example, Jeevan mentioned water leaving, if that's something that you want to ensure does not happen, those would be some of the rules that we would build in to the final market. So keep that in mind as we move forward in some of these discussions, and think about what type of rules you would like to see. Did any of the other team members want to add anything to that? Okay. Jeevan, did I answer your question? Did I address that?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yes, but my concern was, even after the rules, there's always some players that don't follow the rules. That's the reason why I wanted to have the GSA have a final say on the trades. But if that's not possible, I guess I'm asking too much.
Yeah, we'll evaluate the rules and include that as part of the study.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. I heard some background noise. I'm going to mute people again. Please raise your hand or type into the chat.
So let me ask some questions of the group, and I'd like to get some feedback from all of you that are on the call as to what are some of the key concerns that some of you might have on a market. Are you concerned about water all ending up in certain areas, or in too much pumping going on in other areas, or things of that nature? I'm kind of curious as to, from the stakeholder standpoint, when we say market, what would be some of your concerns, or maybe the opposite of that too, is what some of your hopes might be that these are some of the issues that the market would address.
All right, I've unmuted participants. If anyone wants to start, go ahead and speak.
This is Jeevan again. Maybe I sound like a broken record. My biggest concern is that water leaving and not coming back. I mean, there's a lot of growers that have property in more than one GSA, so I have no problem. I understand the necessity to trade water, but I want a rule there, or if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, that they can't just keep taking water out and leave the ground here fallow or something to compensate for it, or they have to bring something back in if they're taking it out. As far as within the GSA, I can't think of any particular area, because it's a democracy after all, and that's why it's a market. Within the GSA, they're free to trade with whomever they want. Thank you.
That's all these toys.
Amira, sorry, you need to unmute yourself.
Greg, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note here that I think it's important to understand with Jeevan's comment there, that when we're talking about marketing any kind of allocation or tradable unit, that essentially what you're doing is you're allowing one well to pump more than another well. It's a little different. We have to think about the hydrogeology that's underneath. It's not that the water is actually physically moving. It might, gradually move there due to a gradient, but essentially if I trade my water to Amir, it means Amir is going to pump my allocation underneath his property, which means he's probably going to experience a little bit of a lower groundwater condition, and it's going to stay higher at my parcel because I'm not pumping. I've essentially sold my allocation that year to pump over to Amir, or traded it in some manner. So I think we have to keep in mind that when we think about markets in this context, it's a little different than what a lot of us want to traditionally think about of a water market, where you're doing a lot of trading. Like if you think of north to south across the Delta water markets, where people are buying water from Northern California and getting it transported across the Delta and sent down into parts of the San Joaquin Valley, or selling water from the west side and shifting that around so it's getting it's getting used somewhere else. Those droplets of water are often actually moving, as opposed to this case. What we're talking about doing is a market structure that trades the ability to access the groundwater that's underneath you. I hope that maybe is helpful.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that a little bit. This idea of keeping the water within the GSA, that's a fairly simple sort of jurisdictional rule you can build in terms of what we know about the hydrogeology in MAGSA and Kings Basin. Some of the things that Greg is talking about are some things to consider, but compared to a lot of places in California, your groundwater flow system is not super complicated. So I think some of the things Greg was talking about will be pretty easy to work into the rules, but the issue of maintaining it within the GSA is definitely doable in a market. And then the question becomes, from a board perspective, if the board is approving every trade, that creates some sort of a time lag between when someone wants to execute a trade and when it can get approved. And so that will be part of what you'd call the transactional cost of that trade that you need to think about, how you can make that effective for the stakeholders that want to use the market.
I am seeing a question.
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Jerry Rye. I think as stakeholders in the GSA, we're looking for the operational flexibility to mitigate, the effects of Sigma. So from that standpoint, we want the whole playbook laid out in front of us that you guys have, and all the options. And we should look at the pros and cons of each and every one, see which ones we find value in, and see what we can move forward with. That's how I see things currently.
Jerry, is there a particular part of the presentation that we could elaborate on for you to kind of answer some of that question?
On the operational flexibility, I think what we're looking for is, I think a stakeholder wants an opportunity to move water around, bring it in, take it out, pump more here, less there. If they're, let's just say we have to fallow ground, and then you move that groundwater pumping ability somewhere else. We want all that flexibility, and being able to buy and sell that amongst each other, and being able to trade that across the basin. I think what we're doing here on a GSA level, I think we want to be able to use that same language and understanding throughout the basin. I don't think we want to be trying to look at different values and languages and rules. We want to have it as similar as we can.
Yeah, across the entire sub-basin. Yeah, that makes sense. Certainly understand.
We want simplicity. This is a new albatross we're putting on top of ourselves. So if we're working with the districts around us or bringing water in, we want to be able to obviously account for that and split that up accordingly and move it as we like. We want that flexibility. So
that's an interesting word. You said albatross. I'm curious. Can you maybe tell me, why do you view it that way? Why do you view it as an albatross as opposed to an option to help you achieve your sustainable goals?
I was thinking of Sigma as an albatross.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just a man that believes in limited government. That's all. Just this is obviously a big task and a big burden, and we have to carefully decide how to handle this, because it definitely affects all of our futures.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. Trust me, I live here too, and I think I've said this. I want to make sure that we're all leaving something for future generations. All of us are making smart decisions in here in the Valley, and that there is ongoing and viable agricultural community and all of the other operations, confined animal and other operations here in the Valley in the future as well.
Yeah, I've seen the bulletin board model outwork in an irrigation district. Pretty simple, straightforward. It was obviously, when I was looking at it, it was on a drought year where there was limited water. So all you had to do was call. There was a list of people with the name and a contact number, and you just call them up and work the deal out.
I'm getting another question. Jeevan?
Thank you, Melka. So this is going to be a long-winded question, no surprise to anybody. As far as to Greg's comment about water not moving physically, at least in the subbasin, I understand that, but my concern is I guess it could be incorporated in the rules. There are growers that have land in different GSAs. One land is better acclimated to the situation than others. And so let's say they have better land in a different GSA, but they don't have the full allocation. So they start using the allocation from here, which is not we all know it's not the best ground in certain parts of the GSA. So then, and technically water is, even though they're giving their allocation up, is that not affecting the GSA in a bad manner? And third, I take it with Jay Rice's comment about limited government, he does not agree with me on having the GSA approve or at least be able to see all the trades. Do we have that? Does everybody have are all the trades public?
In the existing markets, are you asking, Jeevan, are you asking if all the trades are public in the existing markets?
Yeah, do they have it that way, or how do they have? It seemed like in the slides they had mentioned there's an administrator, like sometimes it's the water manager, or sometimes it's the somebody else, third-party administrator. So are the trades public, or only the administrator gets full access?
Steve, do you want to unmute yourself? Steve, you have to unmute yourself. Steve.
I'm muted. There we go. It varies across the examples as to what is public, what's accessible to some of the existing markets. There'll be a portion of the information that's accessible kind of to anyone, the public, and then there's another layer that's only accessible to the the trade manager, whether it's the GSA or a third party, and then there's another layer that's only accessible to the individual traders who are part of it. So these are all decisions that are open to discussion that have to do, kind of the trade-off is sort of confidentiality and not wanting others to understand what the details of your transactions and your business versus a more centralized process in which some of the information is kept private, but others, at some point the aggregate movement in quotes, trading of water has to be reviewed by the GSA, because they have to verify that it's meeting the requirements of their Sigma implementation, their GSP. But within that, there's a lot of room to discuss trade-offs and preferences by the stakeholders.
Thank you.
So we've certainly gotten, Jeevan, did we answer your question or your concerns, or did you want to elaborate on anything else?
No, I'm good. I'll give the floor up to other growers to see if they have any questions.
Yeah, we've certainly gotten some good feedback from both of from a couple of the board members here, and I was looking around the names that are on here. I know that there's several important stakeholders on this call, and I was wondering if you'd like to hear from a few of you others if you have some thoughts on the market, the presentation, or your hopes for the market, or your what you might see as benefits of the market, or as well as some of your concerns.
I did see another question from Jerry. I don't know if you've changed your mind, but
yeah, on the tradable unit, what's the lowest amount of water you can create a tradable unit out of in a situation such as ours, and with groundwater? Is it to the acre foot, to the gallon, to the?
Yeah.
Duncan, do you want to kind of address that? I think you're probably the best suited to answer that question.
Sure. I mean, I can start on it. I think Greg and Wedmore will have some thoughts as well. So I think so there's kind of overall concept of allocation, and then within that, there's a tradable unit. And what limits the level of detail you can get into with tradable units is basically your water budget. I mean, what types of water are you able to identify and agree to and quantify as part of the overall tradable unit? But then I guess that's the way I would think about it. I think how it's measured on a volume, if it's acre feet would be the reasonable way to think about the volume side, but I don't think that's really the key concern. It would be what can you actually manage and agree to and quantify as part of your allocation and tradable unit discussion. And that's something that I know we've looked at a bit. Bob will look at we've looked at the GSP water budget that's together and is definitely part of the overall market consideration.
This is Steve Hatchett. I believe there's language in Sigma that defines sort of de minimis management amounts of water. So I see and I don't remember what the number is. Let's say it's 10 acre feet or 2 acre, whatever it is. You certainly wouldn't want to go below that, because certainly at the level of an irrigation operation, that's getting below the sort of the way you manage water for large fields, even perhaps. So as Duncan said, it's open for discussion, but there probably are sort of lower limits on what would even make sense.
Greg, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to defer. I think I saw Don Cameron raising his hand, so I'd rather defer. I could talk about a lot of things, but I won't.
Malcolm,
John, I am unmuting you.
Yep, thank you. I really appreciate taking the questions. I apologize, I didn't get to see your presentation. I was on another meeting, but I guess my questions are probably pretty relevant. I guess I'd like to see something electronically traded where you know the amount and the price. I don't necessarily need to see who's buying, who's selling, but I'd like to know what price water's trading and the amount that goes with that. And probably traded maybe in an auction type of scenario where you could see the changes and put a time limit. This is for a certain amount of time. And the highest bidder essentially gets, got to be an authenticated buyer and authenticated seller that actually has the ability to do both sides of the trade. And yeah, I definitely would like to see verification by the GSA, because without that, you really don't have any enforcement of what's happening. You have to be able to read meters on both sides of the equation, of both sides of the trade, to verify that the water was available. The person who's selling didn't exceed his pumping limitations, and that the person who's purchasing can verify that he pumped that amount of water. And then what happens? Let's just say he overpumps or he underpumps. What's the scenario? How does that play out? Is it carried forward? Does he have a penalty for overpumping that's really prohibitive? I guess there's a lot of little details that are really going to be important as we move forward. So more of a comment than I guess a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. No, it's a good point. I liked what you said about, it's interesting you said that about the electronic trade with the time limit as well. So, that's something that we'll look into and evaluate as part of our study and see how feasible that might be. Matt, I'm going to just want to confirm with you, Matt Hurley. Sorry. Oh, Matt Abercrombie, question. Okay, I'll hold my comment for Matt Hurley. Matt Abercrombie, why don't you go ahead?
I'm trying to unmute you, Matt. I think it worked. Hold on a sec. Let me try again.
Isn't he on his phone?
I don't think so. Oh, you're on your phone. That's right. You are on your phone. You're both. Let me do that. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Good Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now? So the marketing, and I kind of got the basics of the marketing, but it all kind of comes back until we have meters on these wells, or you know, we're talking about marketing water, but until we have a way to monitor what we're pumping, which I'm assuming would be some kind of meter, are we getting ahead of ourselves? Or can a water market work without some way to monitor the wells?
I think you have to have a way to verify and confirm the amount that's being extracted, and everybody has to feel comfortable that those numbers are accurate. From our study standpoint, that's, you know, we're going to continue moving forward with the study, but you have to have some way to verify the amount of unit that's extracted. Bob, do you want?
So, I agree with that point. So where, and I'll pick on Matt Hurley, I guess, a little bit. Matt, where are we as far as trying to get all these wells metered, or growers that already have meters on their wells, would they be able to trade water earlier, or be part of this, that whenever we could get this in place, the water marketing?
Well, Matt, I was trying to bite my tongue on this presentation because, as the team well knows, I have answers to just about every single question, and I'm trying not to poison the well as we have our conversation at least. Well, but I will tell you that I'm happy to jump up on my metering soapbox.
Matt, we're losing you.
I think we lost you, Matt. And Matt Hurley.
I think Matt Hurley froze.
Yeah,
anyway, I guess.
Matt Hurley, are you back?
I don't know. I can see myself. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say I jump up on my soapbox because I've told the folks in MAGSA especially, and any place that's a groundwater only GSA, that the only way you can logically defend your use of groundwater is to be able to measure it. I, as a manager, can't do anything for my folks or anybody else unless I know how much is being used, because you can't manage what you don't know. And so it's really important to meter, and we're working on coming up with mitigation of costs for metering, et cetera, and we're going to try to incentivize to the maximum extent possible sooner rather than later the acquisition of and placement of meters on hopefully every single well within MAGSA. That would be an overall target. But in the market, of course, I don't think there's any question that you'd have to have a meter in order to make it work, and only those who had meters would be able to subscribe. So that in and of itself becomes an incentive of sorts to get a meter as soon as possible. We do have 2 grant applications going out. We're hoping to have mitigating dollars to offset the costs of some of those meters, and we plan on trying to have telemetry, as was mentioned, I think, in the presentation, so that these would be automatic reporting results, so that we can keep the manpower and the field costs down as low as possible in this process. But metering going forward will be a tremendously important part of MAGSA's success in managing its groundwater, without a doubt.
And I knew that's how it worked, I guess, but I just wanted to hear it. I wanted to get it out there that before we really start thinking about marketing, or they go hand in hand, you're not going to be part of the water market unless you have a way to justify or quantify the water you're pumping or extracting now. So maybe that's just a comment.
Okay, oh wait, Matt, are you, oh, your thumbs up. I'm not seeing any other raised hands, but just in case anyone is having trouble raising their hand, I'm going to unmute everybody. Everyone is unmuted. If someone wants to ask a question or comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Don. Is the presentation that you had today available online somewhere?
It will be done. We will post it to the website, and you'll get the slides as well as the recording of this Zoom call as well.
Great, thank you.
And I'm going to just repeat myself, but I'm going to, please don't hesitate. There's the email address that MAGSA has that's set up, and it's going to, we'll be looking for questions or comments or concerns, both good and bad, the benefits that you want to see in the market as well. So we'll be looking for that. Dave Sepos who works with MAGSA, is going to be reaching out to some stakeholders individually and doing some interviews individually, so people can get a chance to bring out what their hopes and desires for the market are going to be, as well as any concerns. And then, we're going to continue to do some more outreach with the stakeholders here. I see. Oh, go ahead.
I got a question. I'm sorry, this is Guggen Bath. I didn't get to see the presentation as well, so I'm not sure if you guys discussed a timetable on your guys' plans on the rollout of this marketing plan.
So the study is to be completed, Guggen, by April of 21. But between now and then, obviously, we're going to be giving multiple workshops with this group, give regular updates at the board meetings. And then I would encourage you to sign up for the interested parties list, which I'm sure you already have, but we'll be giving updates to the stakeholders on a regular basis, workshops, board meetings, individual outreaches, and then as well as the stakeholder committee that's out there as well, the technical advisory committee, I should say. So our plan is to have lots of input, lots of interaction with the stakeholders and the public, as well as keep you well informed as we start moving towards that April 21st deadline to complete the study.
But remember, it is just a study. So as we said, we're preparing the playbook and showing you what options you have. We're not going to be implementing or making any decisions, and it's going to be completely up to the board whether they want to turn anything that comes out of our study into a decision on starting a water market.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions I am missing?
So just looking at the list, I noticed some familiar names with the DWR. Does anyone from the department have any comments about water markets from a department standpoint?
I think you are unmuted if you want to speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stephen Springhorn from the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office at DWR. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to see the presentation, but I've been on since the Q&A session. So I'll definitely circle back with my colleague Amanda, who's been on the whole time. But really, we're encouraged that these communications are happening, and looking for ways that the state can provide guidance or tools or data that might facilitate markets to help implement SGMA. So again, here in a listening mode, but definitely looking for any feedback and where the state could provide, the DWR part of the state could provide any data or anything that would be useful for any of these local markets. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, so I know it's about 5:40. We've kept you on here for a long time. I know it's late on a Wednesday afternoon, and especially some of you with with harvests going on right now, I've probably had some very long days. Any final questions before we wrap up this call, and then and then make this available to everybody else on online and through the webpage, and make the presentation as well, the slides is available to you as well.
Can I throw my 2 cents in there, Amir?
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
If there's no more questions, I just personally like to thank everybody for showing up for this this workshop. I think it's been pretty informative. I hope you all understand that the bulk of the questions came from 4 of my board members, which is fantastic, because they're the guys who ultimately have to make the decisions about where this market goes and what it looks like, in addition to the stakeholders and the landowners, but ultimately it will be in their hands at some point if we decide to implement this. They are a very active group of board members, and that's a good thing for MAGSA. They're going to stay engaged, and they're going to be really looking out for the landowners' interests. I think all of us are, including all of the support staff. They're trying to be involved in this. Love to have Amanda, Stephen, Mike, anybody else who wants to be a part of our workshops in the future. We'd always love to have DWR aboard. We're happy to show you the right way to go, because we believe that MAGSA is going to have the solutions that will help not only MAGSA, but the rest of the basin and the south end of the state, if not the entire state, because we have some pretty good ideas coming out of MAGSA. So stick around, you might learn something, DWR, what the heck. And for the rest of the folks that are on the line, I hope you'll come back to the next one. I don't think there's any answers that are set in stone yet. This is going to be a process that will be adaptive and informative and two-way questions and answers, and we'll come up with a really good MAGSA marketing plan. I do believe that. And then in early 2021, once we've gotten a lot of meters lined up and getting them put on the wells, we'll be ready to implement something. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and exciting phase to groundwater management in the King Subbasin. So I'm just going to borrow from the solar commercial I watched the other day. I got buttons popping off my shirt today from all the good stuff that happened in this workshop. And I really want to thank the team for an excellent presentation. And I'm looking forward to the next workshop as well. I think we're in good hands, and I think we're going to get a good product out of this, I have but no doubt. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Matt. Good work.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to thank KRCD, Crystal, and Rebecca for helping us get the word out.
And bring the coasters next time.
Yeah. Well, if I think that should wrap it up, Malcolm and Matt. I think, again, want to thank everyone, and like I said, we'll make this available for you all to look at your convenience, and then we're looking forward to some more interactions with this group.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.